special guest on the phone with us. We have our United States Senator, Mr. Tom Cotton, and he is on the air with us this morning. How are you doing today, Senator Cotton?
Good morning. I'm doing great. I hope everyone in Jonesboro, Northeast Arkansas is doing well too.
All right. Senator Cotton, we want to, first of all, thank you for coming by the studio. And first of all, Senator Cotton, I want to say thank you for the recognition that you gave to myself and to KLEK for the Arkansas Community Services Award. So I just want to personally thank you for the recognition.
Absolutely. Glad to do it. It's stations like yours that really do represent the best of communities all around Arkansas and reflect the spirit of Arkansas.
All right, Senator Cotton, we'll go ahead and get into our discussion. The first topic that you want to talk about is the Arkansas National Parks. And according to the information I have in front of me, that the National Park Service is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary, and that you wanted to make sure that Arkansas parks were included in that celebration. So why don't you just go ahead and tell the listeners about some of your efforts to highlight some of the parks in Arkansas for this 100th anniversary, and maybe even name a couple specific parks that you want to highlight.
So we are coming up on the 100th anniversary of our national park system, which I think are one of the great jewels of our country. And we have great parks right in Arkansas as well, like Hot Springs National Park, for instance. So we're going to undertake an effort over the next several months on social media to highlight all of the great features of Arkansas's parks as well as the national park system, because I really do think it's one of the great aspects of our country. People often pay lots of money to go to fancy places on vacation when they often overlook they've got beautiful natural resources right in their own backyard.
All right, and it says over the next year you will release several graphics featuring each of Arkansas's national parks on historic site, as well as submit remarks to the congressional record throughout the year highlighting the history and significance of each park and historic site. So definitely want to thank you for highlighting Arkansas parks.
Yeah.
Okay, and the next thing is Iranian access to the U.S. financial system. You released a statement. The statement reads, since signing the nuclear deal 1 year ago, Iran has continued its provocations of the United States and embraced its push for regional homogeny. It has tested ballistic missiles, captured U.S. sailors, and field conflicts in Syria and Yemen, all while employing death to America as a rallying cry. But in the face of Iran's continued aggression, the Obama administration has displayed only weakness. So intense is his fear that the Ayatollahs will rip apart the Iran agreement that President Obama has completely disfigured U.S. strategy in the Middle East, to the point where adversaries are allies and allies are adversaries. And if reports that he would grant Iran access to the U.S. banking system are true, he would not only be declaring Iran truly open for business, but would also render the United States complicit in the Ayatollah's financing of terrorism and regional instability. 1 year of an emboldened Iran is enough. The United States should maintain Iran's isolation from the U.S. banking sector, immediately take action to restore other sanctions related to terrorism and human rights violations, and clamp down on Iran's illicit weapons shipments. So, Senator Cotton, let's talk about Iran. What is your primary concern with this, in addition to what you mentioned?
Thank you for giving that background. So the Iran nuclear deal, I think, is very dangerous in the long term because it puts Iran on a path to a nuclear weapon, whether they violate the deal or whether they obey the deal. But in the short term, it's also very dangerous because Iran is continuing its campaign of terror throughout the Middle East, which included hundreds of soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan dying at the hands of Iranian bombs. The President and the Secretary of Treasury and the chief official in charge of anti-terrorist financing all promised that Iran would not be able to access the dollar after the deal passed. And that's because the dollar allows you to trade freely with virtually any country in the world. Just a couple of weeks ago, though, the administration officials began to backtrack and suggest that the United States would allow Iran to access dollars. And that would be the final death blow to all the sanctions that we still have in place against Iran. It would make it almost impossible for a future administration to take steps to rein in Iran's campaign of terror. So I strongly oppose this one last concession that the administration is proposing to undertake, and I certainly hope that we can stop it.
All right. Do you think that there will ever be a chance for the Iran and the United States to coexist peacefully?
I certainly hope so. Iran is a very large country, 80 million Iranians. Many of them are very young. They're oriented towards the West. They're attracted by the United States way of life. Unfortunately, they're governed by a bunch of crazed Ayatollahs. So until Iran has a government that is peaceful and representative and wants to live in peace with its neighbors in the United States, Iran is going to remain an enemy of the United States.
Alrighty, we're going to go ahead and move on because we don't have a lot of time in the interview, and we do want to get to a couple of the questions that listeners submitted that we sent to Senator Cotton. So the next topic is military preparedness and funding, and I'm going to read the statement that Senator Cotton sent. There is some discussion within the Congress about mandating a certain end strength of the U.S. Army at a higher level than 450,000. I think that would be a good idea. I would like to see it much higher than that. Can you talk about the consequences, though, if this Congress does, in fact, mandate a certain end street without increasing your budget numbers? So I think the issue here is how can we keep the military strong as well as keep the budget balanced?
Absolutely, and this is a very important topic for many of your listeners whose sons and daughters or moms and dads are in the Army or the National Guard and may be deployed overseas. The one thing we can never do is send our troops overseas into harm's way without proper training and equipment and funding. Therefore, the Chief of Staff of the Army has rightly prioritized those approaches, trying to make sure that all of our troops are properly funded, equipped, trained before they go overseas. If Congress arbitrarily mandates a higher number of troops in the Army, which I certainly would like to see, I'd like to see much more than many people talk, without providing the additional funding, that's only going to put those troops at risk because they won't be properly equipped and trained. It's also going to put our future troops at risk because we're going to have to borrow more money away from long-term investments in new helicopters, new vehicles, new weapon systems, new command and control systems. So the root of the problem here is 7 years of dramatic budget cuts to the Army. If the Army was properly funded, then we'd have the right number of troops, they would have the right training and the right equipment, and the next generation of troops would have the right kind of weapon systems in the future as well, because it would be able to invest in advanced technology.
All right, and piggybacking off of that, this was a question that a listener submitted this comes from Dr. Chris Galinter. What are your plans to better equip the veterans to cope when they return home, as many veterans struggle with health care and mental issues when they come back from combat? You talked about having to make sure that the Army is prepared when they go to battle, but what about when they come home and they have to transition back into society, and some of them have PTSD, some of them may have injuries, or they may have lost an arm or a leg, or they may need assistance transitioning into society. So what about those veterans? What will you do to help them?
We have to care for our veterans. Not only do we have a moral obligation to care for those who bore the battle for all of our freedom, but as George Washington said, the nation's ability to raise and provide for armies is in direct proportion to the way it cares for the soldiers of the last battles. The VA system is oftentimes manned by very patriotic people, in many cases veterans themselves, but they frequently don't have the right kind of modern tools, technology, and techniques that they need to provide for the veterans who return from the battle. Just 2 years ago, Congress passed a law, the VA Choice Bill, that would have expanded veterans' options to use not just the VA system, whether the big hospital in Little Rock or Fayetteville or small clinics, but also use local health care providers. For instance, there in Jonesboro, there's a vibrant and thriving health care community. I would like to see that bill expanded. I'd like to see it made permanent as well, so we can encourage more veterans to be able to take control of their own health care, get it in the way that best suits them without imposing a one-size-fits-all mandate through the government.
And you yourself are a military veteran, correct?
Yeah, I served about 5 years. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Okay, and what branch of the military did you serve in?
I was in the Army.
All right.
I was a ground pounder.
All righty. We're speaking with U.S. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, and once again, we want to thank Senator Cotton for taking this time with us. Now let's move on to an issue that a lot of our listeners care about. It is President Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland to the U.S. Supreme Court. As soon as Justice Antonin Scalia passed away, it was the position of many within the Republican Party to not hold a hearing at all, that the decision should be deferred to the next president. But there are a lot of people out there that feel like, well, we got a president that's already been in the office, that's been elected office, and part of his job is to nominate a justice to the Supreme Court, which President Obama did. He nominated Judge Merrick Garland for that seat, but there has been no movement on his confirmation. So the question that my listeners have to you, Senator Cotton, is why not hold a hearing on Judge Garland. The Republicans still hold the majority. They could still vote no to not confirm him, forcing President Obama to send another nominee that may be more that you all could more support. So what the listeners want to know is, why the position to not hold a hearing at all? Why not just hold a hearing, vote no, and continue the process from there?
So I think this is larger than just Judge Garland's qualifications. This is not a commentary or reflection of my opinion of him as a man or as a jurist. This is about a principle. The principle is the American people should decide this matter. It's very rare that the American people get a choice to decide both who will control the Congress and who will control the presidency. But this year, because of Justice Scalia's unfortunate and untimely death, they have the opportunity to decide who will control the Supreme Court as well, because it's currently evenly decided. And just a few months away from the election, I don't think that we should deprive them of that opportunity. In 2012, as you say, they elected President Obama, and part of his job is to nominate judges to courts, to include the Supreme Court. But in 2014, in a historic election, they elected a new Republican majority to provide a check and balance on President Obama. That's something of a split decision. So here in 2016, they're going to have a chance to render a new decision, and I think we should wait and listen to what the American people have to say just a few months before the election.
Okay, even though there has been precedent in past years in the history of our country that Supreme Court justices were confirmed during a presidential election year, what makes this time different than in the past when Supreme Court justices were confirmed in an election year?
Well, I think it's been about 80 years since a election year vacancy was filled. It's been since the 1880s when the election year vacancy was filled, when the presidency and the Senate were held by different parties. I simply think that since we're so close to the election, since there was a divided decision in the last two election cycles, that we give the American people a chance to speak. And frankly, this is what Vice President Biden, Democratic Senate Leader Harry Reid, and the incoming Democratic Senate Leader Chuck Schumer have all said in the past as well.
All right. Well, we certainly thank you for your opinion on this matter and letting our listeners know where you stand on this issue. Is there anything else that you would just like to say to all of the KLEK listeners out there, Senator Cotton?
Well, I appreciate all your support over the years, and I want you to know that I'm there to support you as well. We've got an office in Jonesboro in the municipal building, but the easiest way to reach us is my website, cotton.senate.gov. Again, that's cotton.senate.gov. So if you have any kind of issue with any federal agency, whether it's the VA or Social Security Administration or the IRS or a passport, or if you're just coming to Washington, D.C. and you'd like to get a tour of the Capitol, or you just want to express your opinion on a matter, please, we'd be glad to hear from you, glad to help you. So just go to cotton.senate.gov and you can get in touch with us.
All right, Senator Cotton, we want to certainly thank you for your time. Senator, if you can just hold on for 1 minute, we're going to get ready to go off the air. I want to speak to you for a second off the air. But once again, we want to thank Senator Cotton for calling in. We hope you enjoyed this interview. We went live on Facebook, so you can look at the video of this interview and you can check it out, share it with your friends, and you listen to KLEK 102.5 FM.